of course, I've been reading this from the Granz Jazz of the Philharmonic tour guide for the 12th tour. Fantastic David Stone Martin artwork again. And so we're talking the fall of 52, perhaps, when this is all being written and taken place. And a lot, of course, has happened before this. So let's get down to the roots of that story. I, of course, had a little interest in collecting the 78s, even though they were the original formula for how these recordings came out. I no longer have my Victrola. I gave it to my brother. I got rid of all my 78s. I have enough vinyl weight to carry around with me to last several lifetimes. So I try to get things in their oldest format that works for how I collect. And for me, that would be the 10-inch album. And so a lot of these 10-inch albums came out early 50s, recycling, regurgitating what was issued in the 40s on 78 RPMs. And so I'm going to show you this JATP series via the 10-inch, which the first 14 volumes come out on 10 inches. One of the things I was kind of surprised by is these recordings don't match the tours. They pick and select recordings from specific tours, and will sometimes do 2 or 3 10 inches from a specific tour that they recorded, that they were really happy with the show. I think some of the other tours get completely ignored. There's still a huge volume of work. It's pretty incredible how much these guys did. But again, they don't really correlate one-to-one. Volume 1 doesn't mean this is the first tour. However, this first album is recorded in Los Angeles, I believe in 45. I'm not sure. Some of these dates are tough to find. But this was the first one. After the How High the Moon stuff. Jazz of the Philharmonic. And again, you can see that this one is on that Stinson label, which is affiliated with the Moses Ash, an Ash label recording. Classic cover, the trumpeter that we see on all the Norman Granz work for a long time. On this first concert, we have a guy by the name of Garland Finney on the piano, who's a Los Angeles player. The Great Red Calendar's on the bass, who's also a well-established tuba player at the time. Ulysses Livingston's on the guitar, who's the guy who had played with Benny Goodman and Ella Fitzgerald. A guy by the name of Joe Guys on the trumpet, who had worked with Lucky Millinder, the great kind of Italian big band leader who was pretty flashy. Illinois Jacquette, who's kind of the star of these early sessions, was on the tenor sax, who of course had become quite famous playing with Lionel Hampton. Flying Home was one of the signature pieces, and everyone who played with Hampton from that point forward had to learn to play Flying Home if you were going to be a tenor sax player with Lionel Hampton's big band. But it was Jacquette's flagship in a way. Howard McGee, the young bebopper, was playing some trumpet on this, who had worked with Charlie Barnett, Lionel Hampton, and also worked with Coleman Hawkins at times. The great Charlie Ventura, the Philadelphia Italian, he's also on the tenor sax and was playing with Gene Krupa at that point. And then a guy by the name of Willie Smith, who's fairly forgotten today, was a great alto player. And he often ends up kind of going head-to-head with Charlie Parker in a lot of these early concerts. And they have fairly divergent styles. And according to Norman Granz, a lot of these liner notes, there was equal following in the crowds for both players. I'm guessing the audiences knew him pretty well from what the liner notes say. And we certainly don't know his name very well today whatsoever. So that was the group on the first record. The liner notes, I've been debating if I should read these to you. Some of them are really interesting. But I'll try to read some of this for you guys here. Generally speaking, a recording date in jazz can be attempted in 2 ways. You can either set it up in terms of notated arrangements, or it can be an improvised session. In the latter method, which is more the usual one, the factor you strive for is, in essence, the jam session effect. However, no matter how closely you may approximate the spontaneous improvised jam session, you can never really achieve it simply because the record date isn't the real thing. Obviously, for example, the physical limitations in terms of time of a 10-inch or 12-inch record is a natural deterrent for these musicians, and to the fact that it's a record date inevitably causes a certain amount of tension on the part of the men. But in this album, we've got it. This is it. This is a jam session, recorded with the men, unaware that they were being recorded. With the spontaneity, the clinkers, the wonderfully timed extemporaneous ensemble work behind each soloist, the natural knocked out comments of the musicians when a particular solo moved them, the exhortations of the crowd, the shouts and the applause. In short, this is a live concert brought into your own home. And so that's the philosophy that kind of exists behind a lot of these dates. And this could have been a concert at any Philharmonic anywhere. Every city has its own Philharmonic, whether it's called Carnegie Hall, the Opera House Town Hall, or simply a meeting place. But specifically, this is the Philharmonic Auditorium in Los Angeles, California, where I presented a series of 15 jazz concerts this year. So, again, we're seeing that his point is I want to get these guys playing in a live, natural setting, which I think would be full of life and full of energy. And this is volume number 2. That's obviously Lester Young on the cover. This one has Howard McGee on the trumpet, Lester Young, the great legend, on the tenor sax. Willie Smith is on the alto. As I said, he played with Harry James and Jimmy Lunsford. Charlie Parker is on the alto, who had worked with Jay McShann and Billy Eckstein and was a star on 52nd Street by this time. Al Killian is on the trumpet, who also played with Charlie Barnett. Arnold Ross is on the piano, who works with Harry James as well. Billy Hadnot's on the bass, a name I don't know very well. And Lee Young is the drummer, who was Lester Young's brother, who was working with Lionel Hampton's group at this time. Blues for Norman, I Can't Get Started Without You are the 2 tracks on this record. And most of these songs tend to be longer, drawn-out jams, as I said. Volume 3 has Dizzy on the cover. Fantastic stuff. With Charlie Ventura, Charlie Parker, Willie Smith, Lester Young, Shoeless Joe Jackson, who's actually Mel Powell, who played with Benny Goodman, if I remember. Al Killian on the trumpet again. John Burks Gillespie, who's actually attributed as being John Burks in this one, probably for contractual reasons. Same with the Shoeless Joe Jackson, Mel Powell. I'm sure that was a contractual thing as well. Again, Billy Haddon on the bass and Lee Young on the drums. Here they played Crazy Rhythm and Sweet Georgia Brown. Volume 4 follows next. Again, great artwork by David Stone Martin. Here we have Illinois Jacquet once again. Les Paul is on the guitar, who at this point was still very much a brilliant player. He had started a more commercial side of his career, but he was able to play the jazz with the best of them at this point in time. A guy by the name of Shorty Nadine's on the piano, who I know very little about. Jack McVie is on the tenor sax, who worked with Lionel Hampton, another fairly forgotten name. J.J. Johnson's on the trombone, who was working with Benny Carter at that point, also works with Basie after this. Johnny Miller's on the bass, who works with Nat King Cole and the Nat Cole Trio. And then Lee Young, again, Lester's brother. They played Lester Leaps In and the Blues on this. Again, side-long jams. You can see the Mercury logo on all these with the Norman Granz trumpeter. So he's just doing what he has to do to get this off the road. Volume 5, another great David Stone Martin line drawing. And this one has the same lineup as Volume 4. They do Body and Soul and Rosetta on this one. And they had a guy by the name of Shorty Chirac on the trumpet for one of the numbers. I think it's Rosetta, if I remember. Again, these aren't by any means full sampling of the concerts. They're just small bits with lineups that he can record and release that aren't under contract. And I think it seems like he's signing them as he's going when he can and coupling them into his, why am I blanking here? Clef. On his Clef label, he's signing this talent up as it becomes available to be signed. So by the time he gets to 55, 56 and launches Verve, he's got this huge stable of talented players who he's been paying well for a long time. Volume 6, again, that's a very standard Philharmonic approach with the trumpeter. And again, these were also all issued again on LP and then on CD. So there's lots of different ways you can get this stuff. On Volume 6, Los Angeles, this was recorded at the Embassy Auditorium. They played JATP Blues and Slow Drag. This has Coleman Hawkins on tenor. Great, Lester Young. Willie Smith on alto with Charlie Parker on alto. Buck Clayton's on the trumpet. It was his first concert since even the Army. Billy Haddon on the bass again. Kenny Kersey on the piano. The great Irving Ashby shows up on the guitar. Another guy, John Michel, told me about, who was working with Lionel Hampton at the time. Shadow Wilson and Buddy Rich are on the drums on Volume 6. And again, there's a much bigger stable at the actual concerts themselves. There's Volume 7, the same concert as Volume 4 and 5. So you have the same players with Jack Kett, Jack McVie, J.J. Johnson, Johnny Miller, Les Paul, Red Callender. They do T for Two and Found a New Baby on this one. Another great David Stone Martin cover. Volume 8, I don't think that's a David Stone Martin cover. I think that's somebody else. And this one's far more dated looking than most of the other ones that we've seen from DSM. On Volume 8, this one's recorded at Carnegie Hall, November 1947, from the 5th National Tour. This has Illinois Jack Kett. Flip Phillips is on the tenor. Howard McGee's back on the trumpet. The great Bill Harris is on the trombone. Hank Jones is on the piano. Ray Brown's on the bass. And then Joe Jones of Basie's group was on the drums on this one. Here they do Perdido on both sides, a long extended version of that. On Volume 9, one of my favorite covers, and I've seen this in books a lot. Fantastic David Stone Martin. Looks like Ray Brown down there. Is that Lester and Flip Phillips? It's hard to say. On Volume 9, you got Jack Kett, Flip Phillips, Joe Jones, McGee, Hank Jones, Ray Brown, Bill Harris. And they do more Ditto on this, which is a kind of continuation of Perdido, the Ellington track, on Volume 8. On Volume 10, it's again a continuation of the same concert, and it's called End Ditto here. Perdido, more Ditto, End Ditto. And again, it's a long, drawn-out jam session that is played by some of the finest musicians in the music at this point. Volume 11, again, a great David Stone Martin cover. And Volume 11 has Dizzy Gillespie on it. This is from 1946. They're going backwards on this one. Lester Young, Willie Smith, Mel Powell, who's now called Mel Powell, probably because he's no longer under contract. Charlie Ventura, Billy Haddon, Lee Young. They play The Man I Love on this on both sides. Fantastic, blues-drenched, jamming, filled with soul, yearning, pain, sorrow, expression, joy, happiness, sadness. Jazz just embodies it all, and the blues allows you to express all of it. Volume 12, another really cool cover. And Volume 12 has Ray Brown, Hank Jones, Buddy Rich, Flip Phillips, Tommy Turk on the trombone, who I think he was discovered somehow during the JATP. Roy Eldridge on the trumpet now at this point, who I think had just come back from the service or being overseas, actually, I think it was. Charlie Parker and Lester Young. So you got like Eldridge, Parker, Lester Young, just some real all-star talent. They play Lester Leaps In on the opener on this one. Incredible stuff. Volume 13 has Ray Brown, Flip Phillips, Buddy Rich, Hank Jones, Tommy Turk, Charlie Parker, same as Volume 12 by the looks of it. And they do Embraceable You and the closer on that one. And then Volume 14, this has Lester Young, Charlie Parker, Coleman Hawkins, Irving Ashby, Billy Haddon, Buddy Rich, Willie Smith, Kenny Kersey. They do I Surrender Dear and I Got Rhythm. And so that's the 10-inch era, volumes 1 through 14. But it's not the end. They continue now into the LP era. And it's in this LP era where they can now present much fuller concerts on vinyl. So they move into the LP era, and Volume 15 has 3 full-length LPs in it. It's got a nice little write-up. It actually has a little tag in here explaining, incidentally, I thought you might like this program. We sold it at the concert. It's so accepted with our compliments with this album. You will note that Benny Carter is not in it. But as I said before, he was a great artist at the Carnegie concert only. And 2, though Miss Fitzgerald is in the program, she contractually could not, as I said before, appear musically on the album. So they threw this in there. And they do have Ella in the flyer, and I'll show you that. But again, a nice little write-up on the inside of the jacket. And then this concert promotion is really fantastic. There's Norman on page 1. Page 2 has Ella Fitzgerald. Page 3, Lester and Flip Phillips. Page 4, Roy Eldridge, and an advertisement for Martin trumpets. Page 5 is the great and largely forgotten Charlie Shavers, who I'm a big fan of. Some concert photos. Page 6 is the whole program, showing you the different groupings and events. Page 7, Oscar Peterson, Barney Kessel, Buddy Rich, and again, Buddy's promoting his Gretsch drums there. Well, actually WFL drums, sorry, I thought they were Gretsch. Hank Jones is a very young man. Young Ray Brown on the bass. Gene Krupa. Again, another advertisement for Krupa. And then some more advertising. So it's a cool flyer program that came with this concert. And so they're able to give us a much more extended look at what a JATP concert was like. In Volume 15, I think it's from 52. And it's not the whole thing. They can't include the Ella stuff musically, but they did have her in the flyer, which is nice. Again, a David Stone Martin cover, and a fantastic, broader stroke of what the concert experience would have been like. Here now goes Volume 16. Again, a cool David Stone Martin cover. They're carrying out the tables for a lovely event at the cafe. Volume 16 has Oscar Peterson. It's got Ben Webster, Flip Phillips, Bill Harris, Willie Smith, Benny Carter, Charlie Shavers, Roy Eldridge, Lee Young again. Or is that, I think it's Lester actually. Herb Ellis, Ray Brown, J.C. Hurd, and Oscar. And actually, Herb Ellis, Ray Brown, and Oscar perform as the trio. But they also, along with J.C. Hurd on drums, back Lester Young in the Lester Young Quintet. So you're just getting some outstanding players. Again, the full concert, Volume 16. And then last but not least, this is Volume 17. And I think this one is from 53, maybe. 54, at the Hartford Bushnell Memorial Auditorium. And again, liner notes inside, 3 LP set. And this one comes with a wonderful envelope filled with the great players' photographs. Here's the envelope that it came in, a pictorial study of the musicians. I'll just show these to you one by one here. The great Lionel Hampton, the fantastic young Herb Ellis, who was a big part of the Ray Brown, Oscar Peterson trio. Ray Brown, the young gentleman of the bass, who was really one of the most enunciated bass players of any era. His tone was impeccable. His enunciation and clarity was just unrivaled. He, of course, comes from the Blanton Oscar Pettiford school, but Ray really was a giant that kind of slips under the radar, in part because he's on the Blue Note Prestige radar of most jazz collectors today. There's the great Oscar Peterson, the Montreal native, one of the great Canadian jazz players. Here's the great Bill Harris, who works for Norman for a long time on the trombone. As I guess it was Woody Herman. There's the great Buddy Rich, who goes on to lead his own big band for a couple decades as one of the most fiery players that we've ever seen. There's the great Buddy DeFranco, sorry. Buddy's a great Philadelphia-born Italian, fiery player. No, this guy needs no introduction. The great Dizzy Gillespie. Here's a guy that's kind of new to the JATP at this point. The drummer Louis Belson, fantastic drummer, who his version of Skin Deep with Ellington is wonderful. He is playing with Ellington at this point, if I recall. There's the great Ben Webster, the Gentle Giant, a big, burly beast of a man with a passion for food, women, and alcohol that would be hard to rival. Here's the great suave, debonair Roy Eldridge, just clean cut, sharp as a tack, bright tone that really fills the gap between Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie. Eldridge is really that next generation of trumpet player. And then, of course, Flip Phillips, who was at almost every JATP from dusk till dawn. He was a constant contributor to the shows. Even though I don't think he makes every one of the records, he was at all the concerts. So it's really quite an incredible legacy. 17 volumes. They've been condensed into fewer LPs and even fewer CDs. But what a legacy. And we're going to intersperse some more of Jean-Michel's work into this episode, just so y'all can get some of the real personalities from the players themselves, what they had to say, and the stories behind this music. Let's enjoy some of that Jean-Michel right now, shall we? I hope everybody enjoyed this series on Norman Granz and the Philharmonic. It's a great series filled with a lot of groundbreaking jazz that really shapes the next few decades of the music more than people recognize today. I want to thank my friend Jean-Michel, who's a real resource to me. He can validate stories for me that I've been told. If he hasn't heard about it, chances are it's not something that's real. He's certainly known musicians and been in the circle of these musicians for so long that he's a great fact checker, but he's also a great validator of a lot of my gut feelings and impulses and the processes I go through. He's often the guy that I sound things off of, or he'll comment on the video saying, that's exactly what so-and-so told me. That's how they felt about a lot of these things. So again, thanks to Jean-Michel for his participation in this. I'm going to give you a few snippets of his that I didn't use in the video for those of you who want to watch them, because I think they're great stories. And every one of these stories helps us understand Norman Granz, the music, the musicians, the times that this all happened in. And so I'm going to let these next 10 minutes or so of his little clips run out. Hope you enjoy them. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.
During the 60s and the 70s, even the 50s, you had a lot of journalists and critics that put Norman Granz down for some work that he did. They were laughing at him when he recorded about 45 albums of Art Tatum, because in those days Art Tatum was no more popular, but was popular was Thelonious Monk, Bud Powell, even Horace Silver. I think Horace Silver was a good piano player, but he was not a great piano player. But people love him, I love the way, but I don't put him in this category of a great piano player. Great arranger, great composer, great leader, great feeling, So, in those days, everybody was laughing at Art Tatum. That was old-fashioned piano. And, he said, I don't take care of what people say. My strong feeling is Art Tatum is the best piano player, the best jazz pianist who ever was. So, as Art Tatum lived in LA in the 50s for a long time, and Norman Granz lived there too, and he did a pact with him. He said, all right, I give you the key of the studio. Every time you want to go, you just have the key, you have the piano, I call the sound engineer, and we record it. So artist who called the sound engineer at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and he said, okay, I'm ready for 10. So he recorded from 10 p.m. from 10 a.m. during the night. So that's how I did all those solo sessions, about 20, 21 albums, and maybe about 15 albums, but small groups, you know. And now, today, all those albums are classics, you know. The same with Charlie Parker. They put him, yeah, he's recording Charlie Parker with strings, but Charlie Parker wanted to play with strings. And you have to know in those days that if you book a string sections or a Philharmonic orchestra, it costs you a lot of money. So nobody wanted to do that because no producer had the money to do that, except Norman Granz. So Norman Granz said, okay, you want to play with strings? Okay, let's do it, you know. And that's how it happened. And now it's classics. Maybe to me, Charlie Parker with strings is the best session that Charlie Parker ever recorded. If you okay, the strings arrangements are awful. Okay with that. But listen to what Charlie Parker played on that. I mean, to me, this is the best of Charlie Parker. So again, came classics. You know, they put Norman Granz down again when he did this album with 1950 with Monk, Dizzy. I think that's Curly Russell on bass and Buddy Rich. Everybody said, yeah, he obliged Charlie Parker to play Buddy Rich, but you don't know that. You don't know that Charlie Parker's favorite drummer was not Max Roach. No, that was Buddy Rich, you know. So, I mean, you know, Norman Granz, he could be rude, he could say, you have to play one, but he didn't say to musicians, I want you to play this and you shut up, you know. If musicians are not comfortable to play with, nothing happens, you know. Only bad things happen, you know. So Charlie Parker said, I want to do an album with Thelonious Monk and I want to have Buddy Rich on drums. And everybody said it doesn't work today. And now, again, those sections are classics, you know. So we, you know, a lot of journalists and a lot of critics wrote, and are still writing shit about this music. It's very different about rock and classical, you know. But again, in jazz, you always find some silly people who said silly things or write silly things about musicians. How they know, you know, how they know. You know, I have another story about, I was in 1974 when, you know, there was this tour with Count Basie playing with Oscar Peterson, you know, and they played great together because they were great together because they were totally different, you know. And Norman Granz was there, it was in Basel. And there is this journalist said, well, Count Basie can't play the piano. Can't play the piano because he played a few notes, you know. And Norman Granz said, do you play music? Do you play the piano? Do you have a paper in musicology? Do you study musicology? Do you have something about it? Journalist went right away. So, yeah, you know, I mean, enough is enough, you know. That's what I wanted to say about that. How the musicians felt about Norman Granz. Since I met many of them who played with and for Norman Granz for decades, you know, Sweet Edison, Clark Terry, Roy Eldridge, Hank Jones, John Lewis, Oscar Peterson, Ray Brown, Bob Crenshaw, Niels Henning, Orsted Peterson, Buddy Rich, Grady Tate, Louis Belson, Joe Jones, J.J. Johnson, James Moody, Dizzy Gillespie, you name him. you know. All of them told me, explain me the same thing and use the same word. He was a champion. That's the way that they all said about Norman Granz. So they revered him, as a defender of this music. Music, race, work, and respect. So that's what Norman Granz did. Stories, there are a lot of stories, maybe long stories. Uh, I have this one, maybe you know about Oscar Peterson. Oscar Peterson in 1947-48, he had a weekly radio show, and in Toronto and Montreal, but this was in Montreal. And one day, Norman Granz was in Montreal to promote a concert for Artie Shaw and the Gramercy Five. So he did the concert, and when it was time to go back to the airport and go back to New York, he took a cab, and he went to the cab, and suddenly he heard the music and he heard a piano player. And he said to the cab man, he said, do you know who is the musician? Do you know which album is it? And the guy said, this is not an album, this is just live now. And he said, live? And he said, yeah, so turn it. So he turned it, and he went right back to the club, and he booked Oscar Peterson, you know. So that's how he just like that, bam. But he can wait. He could wait. He waited for about 10 years to book, to record, and to be the real manager of Ella Fitzgerald. Ella was on Decca's contract for 15 years, and the contract ended up in 1956. So the day that the contract was over, he formed Verve, and he formed Verve for Ella Fitzgerald. Yeah, it's not for anybody else. Um, another story. That was in 1947. Ray Brown was a part of the Dizzy Gillespie Big Band, and one night he saw jazz at the Philharmonic, and he said, "Okay, we play 3 sets with the band, with Dizzy Gillespie Band. So we have enough intermission. I can go and see a few part of the concert, about 45 minutes." So he went to the hall, and he met some musicians that he already knew and he played with: Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster, Howard McGee, the piano player. I can't remember the name of that piano player now. Buddy Rich, and J.J. Johnson, that he met many years before. So he was there, say hello, and so and so. And suddenly, when it was time to go on stage, there is no bass player. And everybody said, where is the bass player? No bass player. And the Coleman Hawkins said to Norman Granz, he said, there is a bass player there, backstage. So he's there. So Norman Granz went through Ray. He didn't even ask his name. He said, you are a bass player? And Ray said, yes. Go on stage and play. And Ray Brown said, hey man, I can't do that because I have to play with the Dizzy Gillespie Big Band in about 20 minutes. He said, no way, you go on stage, I call Dizzy, I will fix it. That's how he did. And that's how a couple of weeks later, when Dizzy Gillespie fired Ray, 3 days after he got the job at the Jazz Institute at the Philharmonic. So that's why Norman Granz was so great. He just he could wait. He had this instinct to do the right things, to put the right musician, the right things at the right moment. So there are a lot of other stories, but there are a few that I told you. Norman Granz about jazz and about musicians. He was a fan. He was when he was small. People don't know or can't remember that he did his first session as a producer we don't know exactly. I didn't make the research, but some people say 1939 or some others 1942. His first session as a producer was with Lester Young, Nat Cole, and Red Callender in LA. So you have to remember about that. Norman Granz, his philosophy is to fight racial prejudices. And he said that the only way to do it is to produce jazz concerts with jazz musicians, mixed race, black, white, and he was successful, you know. Um, he started to book venues in LA, and he started to organize jam session on Monday nights. Why Monday nights? Because Monday every places were closed, so he could choose the places that he wanted for almost not a lot of money because that was closed. So he began with that and was successful. And one day he said, now I want to book the Los Angeles Philharmonic Older Theater. And he wanted to name it a jazz concert at the Los Angeles Philharmonic Older Theater. But the guy who did the poster said, man, it's too long. It's too long. You have to shorten that. So he called it Jazz at the Philharmonic, and later on, JATP. And the first concert was in July 2nd, 1944 with J.J. Johnson, Jack McVie, Nat Cole. Nat Cole was not on his name, Nat King Cole, was on Shorty Nadine because he had some contracts with other labels and managers. So it began to be very successful. And the first concert was not recorded. As many people, they thought that was not recorded. That was not his intention to record first. That was a disc jockey for the Air Force who had the idea and said to Norman, but you have to record the concerts. But that was only in 45. So Norman Granz was again a champion because he mixed races, jazz musician, the old school with the new school, because he mixed swing people, Dixieland people, and bebop people. So the guy was again great of what he did. Norman, not an easy guy to be with, to deal with, to work with. I saw Norman Granz many times, but I didn't really knew him, you know. He knew me because he saw me everywhere, Geneva, Zurich, Bern, Lausanne. So he knew that I was a fan, but he didn't came to say me, hello, oh, can you show me your books? Because, I came with some books with my father and my mother. I came with, LPs and, 10-inch, from Norman. He didn't ask me that. He didn't care about that. But it was nice. I came to the hotel and said, hey, Mr. Granz, I had a meeting with Count Basie, and he said, no problem, I will call you. So stay there. So in a few minutes, they said, okay, Basie asked you to go up to his room, It was nice, but I didn't. And it was very interesting because he used to live in Geneva. And during the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, I was in Geneva all the time, I didn't meet him. I didn't see him. I used to organize concerts all around Europe and in Switzerland too. Big. In Geneva, Lausanne, Bern, Lugano, Zurich, Basel, small towns sometime. He never came to one of my concerts anywhere. He didn't came. And you had Ray Brown, you had Oscar Peterson, you had Louis Bellson, you had the Sweets, you had Benny Carter, you had all. Never came to one of my concerts. Never saw him, never heard about it. It was strange, you know. But again, I think he didn't care about that. Norman was a scholar, very scholar, because he loved art, you know. He loved painting, and you know, he loved, of course, Pablo Picasso. He loved Juan Miro, you know, and he knew a lot of things in many fields. You know, he loved great wines, great food. He knew where the great restaurants were. So he didn't only he's a manager only in the music, you know. He was interested into many other things, and he was very clever man. I can tell you, man. You know, really. Everywhere we go, musicians, they said, "Do you know this restaurant?" I said, "Sure." I said, "We went there." You know, no man asked us to go there. You know, so he was a great man again in many different fields. Norman Granz recorded so much that even the musicians, they didn't remember what was recorded and what was not recorded, you know. And I know that it exists dozens of tapes recorded by Norman Granz, never released, and nobody of you guys never heard about. Norman Granz loved, you know, he loved to be the only guy who said, I recorded this guy and this guy, I recorded this, but you don't have it. I have it. He loved that, you know. It was fun, you know. But just to tell you that Norman Granz recorded a lot of sessions that until this second now never been released, never been in any discography ever. You know. So we'll be surprised maybe in later on to may have some unreleased sessions. See what's happened with the Ella Fitzgerald. You know, they just put out recently a concert. They put out 3 years another concert. You know, and I know the Basie and you know many people. You know, he recorded live or in studio. Never came out until today. As I said before, Norman was a champion. Why? Always said why, but I have to tell you a couple of things that you don't know, you don't maybe realize. You know, if you see all those musicians, you had in the same group Charlie Parker, you had Coleman Hawkins, and you had Charlie Shavers, and you had Hank Jones, and you had Buddy Rich, Ray Brown, and you know, that's all total different characters. And you know, you had to deal with all those different characters, and it was not easy of some of them, I can tell you. You know, when you arrive at the soundtrack and the sound, you know, sound check, and suddenly you saw Charlie Parker almost naked, having no alto, didn't know where he was. You had to deal with that because at night he had to go on stage. You had to deal with somebody like Hank Jones, who after 2 or 3 concerts, the next morning he disappeared for the rest of the tour, and you had no piano player. You had to deal with that, you know. You had to deal with somebody like Buddy Rich, who was terrible sometimes. It's very terrible, you know. He wanted to be the first guy to get out of the bus. He wanted the first guy to be in the lobby. He wanted the first guy to be in his room. He wanted to be the first guy to be in the restaurant. And a couple of guys punched him at the end, you know. Oscar Pearson, you know, he said, you guys, you know, stop, you know. and you had to be you had to deal with Joe Jones. That was never okay, you know. You play slow, he wanted to play up. You play up, he wanted to play slow. He loved to drink some cognac, some really special bottles, and he was not agree to play if he didn't had these special bottles, you know. So you had to deal with that every day. You had to put everybody in the same bus, and you had to put those people in the room, but you had to put all of them on stage, and they had to play great because people, they pay a lot of money to see and hear them play. So he had to deal with a lot of that. You had another great guy, Lester Young, who was back in the bus, and you know, Lester Young was he was the way that he played. He was very feminine. He spoke in a feminine way, and he talked and he walked in a very feminine, you know. And he used to call Lady everybody, you know, Lady Ray, Lady Oscar, and Lady Shavers, and suddenly he drank, and he was all drunk, and he couldn't move, and he had to play the night, you know. So you had to deal with that, and he deal with all that shit, you know. So there was again a champion putting all these different musicians, different characters, and putting them on stage, and they play their best all the time, you know. So he was a character, but yeah, I think you have to be a really strong guy, very character. He was very big. It was, you know, to put those musicians together. You had to deal with the Count Basie Orchestra back in the 50s or 60s. Man, you had Frank Foster leaving the band for one day with two girls. Sweet Edison having three affairs the same city, the same day, in three different hotels. They had to be back at 9 for the concert. You have to deal with all that shit. You don't know, but I tell you what's happened, you know. So you have to deal with that. And it was great again at that, you know. So again, Norman Granz was fabulous, you know, a champion. That's the name, that's the word that was used all the time. About Norman Granz, he loved the musicians. He didn't care about races. His main fighting was the racial prejudice. But Norman Granz paid the best payroll to the musician, the best venues, everything the best, but he could be very, very rude. He could harass everybody. He could be angry to everybody. Journalists, producers, manager, sound engineers, and musicians, you know. Man, he could be very, very rude with many musicians that he booked, you know. And he was a very dominant man. So he loved to tell musicians what they have to do. He said, you have to play Stomping Out of Savoy, you have to play Perdido, and you have to do that, and you have to do that. So with some musicians, it was okay. They just did what he wanted them to do. But with other musicians, that was more difficult. I mean, you know, you can't tell that to Oscar Peterson. You can tell that with Ray Brown, and you can tell that with Joe Jones, and you can tell that with a Hilindo's Jacket, for example. Those people, they had, you know, those people, they said, we are musicians, we know what we do. So there was sometimes there were big arguments between Norman and them. We know that when Norman Granz sold the Verve to MGM in 1961, he stopped touring, he stopped doing anything except managing Ella Fitzgerald, Oscar, and a few other people. And in 1967, there was some big arguments between Oscar and Norman, and they didn't talk with each other for 3 or 4 years. That's why Oscar Peterson went to MPS, you know, in Villingen, south of Germany, and he did those 14 or 15 great albums. This is because he didn't talk to Norman, you know, huge arguments. But back after 1972, when 73, when Norman decided to do his new label, of course he called Oscar, and Oscar came back, you know. But you know, it could be very rude, and many musicians, I will not name them now, but many musicians told me that he loved to argue to somebody or some people every day, because he had some strong thoughts, some strong things. We have to do that. You have to do that. You have to do that. If you not agree with him, he could be harass you. He could be very hard. Everything you will do, everything you will play, everything you will think, you will be wrong every time. He will say, you're wrong, you play wrong, that's all. So it could be very rude. So he gave everything to the musicians, the maximum to us, but he asked to the musicians the same. And on many occasions, I think that was too much for the musicians. He asked too much, you know. But I knew that musicians that didn't talk with Norman for years, but I never heard them putting him down and saying, okay, he's an asshole, I hate him. They just said, oh, you know Norman, you know, he loved to argue to everybody. So I don't talk to him. I hope that I will talk to him next time, you know. They didn't put him down for that, because they had so much respect about what he did for them, you know. A short story about what I just told about Norman, very difficult, you know, could be very rude, and he didn't talk with Oscar for years. And in 1978, when Oscar had a Grammy Award, you know, he went on stage and he said, if I have this Grammy Award, this is because Norman Granz. And he gave the Grammy Award to Norman Granz. So it can show you how great respect Oscar and the musicians had for this man.